Stay tuned till the end for the life or death question. You can never trust those insidious small towns. This world is a strange one. Small towns are adorable. Everyone knows everybody. And every body that washes up on the river sends chills throughout the whole town. Sure, small towns are great, but they are the most terrifying place to live when horror starts to go down. So, for those of you that cherish the small towns you may live in, just remember, the smallest towns hold the biggest secrets, and monsters hide more easily in the smallest of towns. Now, enjoy these 5 true small town scary stories. You'd better call U-Haul, it might be time to move. Number 1. Monsters are real. Submitted by Lion Fox. So here is my story. My name really is Lion. Yes, that's my real name. My story takes place when I was 12 years old. I never really believed in monsters or ghosts. But what happened to me is true, and it changed the way I thought and my belief towards monsters. I was living in Boston at the time in a small town called Stowe. My house was in a very small neighborhood, up against a forest line with only a few other houses and lots of forest all around. I was often left home alone in this house for days at a time while my mom was traveling. It was one of those nights that I saw, well, at the time I was not sure what I saw. But I later found out the creature I described to my friend told me that I encountered something that sounded like the rake. It was around 10 at night in October. It was raining with a loud thunderstorm outside. I was in the living room doing homework, feeling uncomfortable, like when someone is watching you and staring intently. I looked around and thought I was being silly since I knew I was alone. I went back to doing homework when my cat, who was never far away, started to hiss and scream. Immediately, he ran off and hid. I had never seen our cat act like that. I started to get chills. My whole body went cold and I was suddenly paralyzed with fear. I somehow knew I was being watched, but I felt too scared to look around and see who was watching me. When I finally found the courage to stand up, I walked to the hallway leading to the rear door of the house. I looked down the hallway, and in the window of the door I saw something that will haunt me for the rest of my life. In the window, there was a large face staring at me. The head was larger than a person's, with massive reflective eyes and a grin that was just not human. I froze and stared back at the creature for what seemed like an hour, even though it must have only been a few moments. As soon as I started to back up, the creature started to hit the window hard enough to break it. I screamed and started to run up the stairs to my bedroom. As I ran, the creature let out a sound I can't describe. It was like a shriek and a baby's wailing at the same time. I heard the glass shatter downstairs and the creature fumbling with the door. As I reached my room, I moved my dresser up against the door and tried to hide. I could hear whatever was in my house stomping around downstairs. I reached for the phone to call the police, but realized it was not on the hook in my bedroom. I had left it downstairs from talking to my mom earlier in the evening. At this point, I was scared, really scared. I heard the thing slowly coming up the stairs. I could hear the creak of the 3rd step, and I knew it was already looking for me. It stopped at my door, and I saw the knob turning, and I heard it rattling. That's when I started to cry. I started shaking almost uncontrollably. I didn't know what to do, so I made the decision to jump out of my window. It wasn't too far off the ground. I opened my window and climbed out. I heard that creature banging against the door. It knew I was inside. I jumped out of my window and ran to the neighbor's house, screaming and crying. My neighbor was a nice older man and was a hunter, so I knew he had guns. He had protection. When I saw him, I told him what had happened, and he told me to stay inside his house. He called 911 and then grabbed one of his rifles and started over to my house. After a few moments, I heard him yelling, "Hey, you! Get off the roof!" Followed by a single gunshot. He came back and locked the door and told me to stay close. When the police finally arrived, my neighbor told the police someone had broken into my house and that he had fired a single shot to scare him away. The police came over to me and asked me what had happened. I told them the story, and after the police finished looking around my house, they told me that it was someone who wanted to break in and that I was a smart boy for thinking so quickly. I tried to tell them that it was not a person, but they dismissed it as me being frightened and imagining things. They never found any evidence of the creature or my cat, who I've never seen since that day. Just the broken window and my bedroom door forcefully opened from the outside. I know it was no man. The way the creature looked at me, it just couldn't be human. The head was all wrong, and I will never forget the sounds it made. I still have nightmares about it to this day. Number 2. Ghost in the Hallway. Submitted by Lizzie Liz. I live in a small town where the school has roughly 150 kids, and that's kindergarten through 12th grade. And if that doesn't tell you how small my town is, nothing will. And of course, every small town has its own haunted house. That house happened to be mine. My mom has always claimed that our house was haunted. She claimed to see shadows, hear voices, and footsteps in the hallway. But I was always a skeptical kid. Anyway, I was about 12 at the time. I was home alone waiting for my mom one night. She was to come home and take me to a church activity. It was 7 o'clock at night, and I was sitting on my couch with my dog at my feet, most likely sleeping. I had always been afraid of ghost movies and such, but that night made my fear of the paranormal activity much worse. The whole house seemed to be alive. The floors were randomly squeaking, walls moaning, and there was a terrible wind outside. I was terrified. I tried my best to just pay attention to what was on television, but all I could hear was my scared breathing. But suddenly, all at once, the squeaking and moaning stopped. It was dead silent, but out of the silence I could hear obvious, heavy footsteps coming from the hallway behind me. My sleeping dog instantly shot up and started barking and running around the house. Being a scared little 12-year-old, I curled up in a ball on my couch and screamed, "Please go away!" And just like that, the footsteps stopped. Everything stopped. The squeaking, moaning, footsteps, all of it. Since then, I have never stayed home alone. Number 3. Never sleep at a deserted gas station. Submitted by Jack's Bro. Before I start my story, I would like to say that I'm about 6 feet and 3 inches tall, and this took place during the middle of summer in 2015. I had recently landed a position in field sales, and I couldn't be more happy with it. The money is great, and the company I worked for even gave me a company vehicle. The only downside to the job is that my sales territory is quite expansive and could at times end up with me driving across several states, and the people I work for sometimes expect me to drive to most of my customers. I was grateful, however, since not that many people my age get these kinds of opportunities. After a couple of weeks of getting the hang of things, I had gotten a business call from a clinic in northwestern Florida that wanted me to come and provide a demonstration of our product. I told them that I'd be there by noon the next day. This drive would take me straight down the middle of Alabama on Interstate 65 and then bring me through Alabama State Route 113 down to Florida. I planned to get there by 11 p.m. the night before. Once I got past Montgomery, it was almost 9:30, so it was already dark. I have experience with driving long distances during the night, so the fact that it was night didn't really bother me. Once I saw the exit sign for Flomaton, I took the exit. I had just noticed that it was already 10 p.m., so I stopped at a gas station and bought myself an energy drink, so that I would arrive at my destination on time. Once I had gotten back on the road, I realized this drive was going to bring me through the middle of nowhere. After about 25 minutes of driving past farms, fields, and small towns, I arrived at another small town, and I stopped at a McDonald's to stretch my legs. Once I got back onto the road and headed south, I noticed a sign. The sign read, "Farm Machinery and Deer Crossing." Crap, another long drive through the middle of nowhere. After about 10 minutes or so, I noticed that my car was running low on gas. After a couple of minutes, I was just praying that I wouldn't be stuck on a country highway in the middle of the night, because it didn't look like there was going to be a gas station anytime soon. As I was driving down the country highway, I tried to use as little gas as possible. Just when my car was about to completely run out of gas, I saw a small gas station barely a quarter mile away. I pulled up, and I noticed that this gas station was pretty run down, and there were no cars at all around it. When I started to think this place wasn't open, I found out that the fill-up tanks were. Once the car was filled up, I was looking at my phone when I heard a sudden but barely noticeable sound on top of the gas station roof. I then looked up, being really quiet to try and hear the sound again. Nothing. Everything was silent. Thinking it was probably nothing and I'm probably just tired from driving so long, I decided to just stop driving for the night and sleep in my car. I looked at my phone for a bit and then fell asleep. I was out for a good hour or so, but I woke up to the same noise again in the same place. This time, I went outside my car to investigate. That was a big mistake. I went to the road so that I could see the roof better, and when my eyes adjusted, I saw a huge, man-like figure crouching on the roof. "Hey, what are you doing up there?" I called out. The thing then suddenly stood up. It locked eyes with me, and then let out this huge, ear-piercing screech, which I remember clearly to this day. The next thing I remember, it jumped down, and I was amazed by how tall the thing was. Based by how tall I am, this thing seemed to be over 8 feet tall. It then ran inhumanly fast into the woods. I know after seeing this thing that this was no skunk ape, but something worse. I as well ran as fast as I could back to the car and got out of there as soon as possible. My heart was beating so fast it could have popped out of my chest at any moment. God knows what that thing could have done to me if I was still sleeping. Once I got to the nearest town, I got a hotel room and tried to calm myself down. I stayed awake all night and then drove down to where I needed to be. A couple of months after my encounter, I remember watching this TV show about mysterious creatures in America. I remember seeing this part about a mysterious creature that matched the description of what I saw that night. Honestly, I still have nightmares about what I saw. That experience has now made me scared of driving through country highways at night, and whenever I go to a gas station after it's gotten dark, I make sure there are at least 1 or 2 cars there already. Number 4. The Leg. Submitted by Emmeline. I had recently been on vacation in South Dakota with my family and 2 others. In my family, there was my mom, my dad, my sister, who I'll refer to as Julia, my other sister, Gretchen, and myself. I was 15, Julia was 12, and Gretchen was 10. In the second family, there were 4 people, the parents and their 2 daughters. The last family was made up of 2 parents and their 3 kids. I woke up on one of the last days of the trip and went outside to sit on the porch of the camper cabin. My parents were up, along with Chet, Carl, and Julia. The adults were at the picnic table and talking about whatever outdoorsy people talk about. I was more of an indoors person. I had no interest in joining their conversation. I was only outside because Gretchen was not a morning person. Julia ran over to me and said that she had to show me something. She brought me only a few feet away from where I had been sitting and pointed at the ground. What I saw made me queasy. It was a leg, half covered in furry skin, that was slowly rotting. You could see the bones poking out. Julia thought it was a pronghorn leg, but I thought it was from a coyote. We told our mom. She said that Nathan and Calvin had brought it over after finding it in the woods near their cabins. Needless to say, I was horrified. The next day, we went to Bear Country, USA, which not only has bears but several other animals as well. In one of the enclosures was a coyote. Remembering that terrifying leg, I looked at the live coyote's legs, and I was right. The leg was the back leg of a coyote. My stomach churned. Whatever had killed that coyote had severed its leg, was big, and obviously a carnivore. There must have been only one creature in the park that fit that description, either a bear or a mountain lion. The thing was, Nathan and Calvin weren't allowed to wander more than about 80 feet away from the cabins. This mountain lion or bear had been near where we were staying, and us kids often played outside in the dark. I was the oldest and the tallest. I was only 5 feet tall, but I was skinny and weak. That mountain lion or bear could have taken us down easily. It just scares me so much to this day to think that that leg could have been one of ours. It's so horrifying that I can't even imagine if that was ever the case. What makes small towns so small sometimes is how much nature surrounds it. And this time around, nature was too close for comfort. Number 5. I'm pretty sure something was stalking me when I lived in the country. Submitted by Skin Rider. This is a story about a culmination of events that happened over the course of a decade, or almost a decade, from when I was a small child to the present day. It's probably one of the most unnerving things that's happened to me, and I'm going to share it with you. It started after we moved to the country outside of Afton, Oklahoma. Afton is a very small town that is barely big enough to be on the weather map. It's mostly a residential area for Grove, Miami, and Veneta, as there are very few places an Afton resident can work. My father moved out there to the country by my grandmother, down the road actually. It was out in the middle of nowhere. I lived most of the year with my mother and stepfather, but during the summer and every other weekend, I'd spend it, or most of it, with my biological father. The house was on a hill, as was our neighbors and my grandparents up the road. You'd go up this huge hill, then you drive by my grandparents, and further down the road, you'd drive on a ridge, and there's a split to go to our neighbors or go down the ridge to our house. It may not seem important, but I'll have an explanation later. The area was by a creek called Horse Creek. Horse Creek had a legend surrounding it, that a tribe of Indians was living on that land in the mid-1800s. The Union wanted to take the small snippets of land on the border of Indian Territory, so they sectioned off a bit and went in to find it inhabited by Creek Indians. So they decided to kill them all. They sent cavalry to secure the village and force the warriors upstream. They positioned riflemen to pick them off one by one. They shot them in the creek like animals, and the horses continued to run upstream until the waters rose too high and they drowned trying to escape. I will post another time with my experience with that, but back to this one. When I was little, I remember seeing a very tall man or shadow of a man in the woods by the house. Whenever I would look at it, it would hide behind a tree. This went on for a few years. I got older, and I'd hear whispers sometimes that would pierce the air. I always brushed it off as me hearing things. As I continued to get older, things started to quiet down just a bit, but they started to pick up again after one night. It was a weekend, and my father came in at night and told me to stay inside because he saw a tall man outside. So he grabbed his gun and the dogs, and he went outside to confront this man. There was a singular power light outside, and when my father got out there was nothing. Things picked up from that. Relatively shortly after, my father was sitting outside at night, and our dogs perked up their ears. They turned to the barbed wire fence and started growling deeply and viciously. At the time, we had a basset hound, and we still have 2 dachshunds. The basset, Sophie, was a sweetheart and never growled at anything, and they growled at the darkness like they hated it with their very being. My father went inside to get his gun, and whatever it was gone by the time he returned. My father eventually took up a job at a wellness center 30 minutes away and left me alone for most, if not all, of the morning. One day we looked out of our bathroom window that overlooked the pasture down at the bottom of the ridge, and we saw a coyote. That's why my father had called me in. But it walked wrong. It stumbled but kept a steady pace, stumbling but not slowing at all. And it was the middle of the day. Most coyotes come out at night to hunt, but not this one. We took out a pair of binoculars and looked at it. Then it, and I kid you not, started galloping into the trees like some kind of horse. A few times I heard my father calling me, but the problem with this was that he was at his job half an hour away, and his voice just didn't sound right. It was too resonant, like he was yelling through a tube. Sometimes I'd be outside and I'd hear 3 sharp whistles, but I'd always assumed it was birds. There were lots of birds, but doing some digging, there were no birds there that could have made that noise. Sometimes I'd hear this terrifying screech out from the hills. It pierced the air and felt like a knife on my eardrum. I always thought it was some kind of animal, but again, no animal could have made that noise. We'd go camping occasionally by the creek, and we'd feel watched, or I'd feel watched. One night, I went to relieve myself at the edge of the woods by the clearing. I finished, but I heard a branch snap nearby. Only 2 things snap branches: large animals and people. I saw no deer, and all of the cows were about a mile away from us. I heard some thud, 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 like footsteps, heavy footsteps. I quickly went down back to the campsite. Here's the pinnacle. One night a few years ago, we were driving home and it was a clear night. The sun had set an hour previous. Then, as we were driving down the road, a fog swept across the road. This confused me. Then something dashed across. It had to have been 7 feet tall, and it had spines running up and down its back. Its limbs were slender and were bone thin. It had large hands and long claws. It had long legs and large feet, and it had a slouched position. When the headlights hit it, it took 2 strides to get across the road, and a third to bound over the ditch and barbed wire fence on the other side. I shouted, "Whoa!" and my father just saw a blur. I was silent for the rest of the drive home. The next day, after my father left, I went outside to see the dogs, and there was a tall figure standing at our mailbox up at the top of the hill. I thought I was seeing things. After a few hours, it finally went away. And a few hours later, or the next day, we were coming back from something and checked the mailbox. Some of the dirt around it was misplaced. I didn't notice it until I remembered. I didn't notice it because it was so big. It was a handprint. That thing's handprint. We moved away a few years ago. I'm not sure about anything, but after hearing more stories and accounts, I think it was a skinwalker, a Native American monster. They are tall, humanoid things that steal the skin of animals and people and wear them to become like them. But there's always something small they get wrong. They can mimic voices and sounds, but they always get it slightly wrong. Oklahoma has a long history of Native Americans living here, and also has the largest or very large number of disappearances that the body was never found, and a lot of freaky unsolved murders. I'm glad we don't live there anymore. That's my story, and I'm terrified at the thought and wondering why it never tried to hunt me. But I thank whatever power was looking after me that it didn't. Small towns aren't as safe and quiet as they seem. Behind closed doors, in the darkness of shadows, your worst nightmares come to life. Cults enact bloody rituals, killers play friendly citizens, and monsters lie waiting for their next prey. Good night. Be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Thanks. Now, time for the life or death question. What is the creepiest neighborhood or house you've ever lived in or near? I lived next to a house where a man shot himself. To this day, the place is abandoned and wrecked. In fact, a few of my background shots on this channel are of parts of that house. Before he died, he helped build the storm shelter in my grandma's backyard. He was the one that painted demons and death on the walls. Some say he was on drugs when he shot himself, but nobody knows exactly why he did it.